To get us into our topic of renewable energy markets in Japan, I'd like to turn things over to Johnny Tan from our JETRO Toronto office. Johnny, take it away, please.
Thanks, Ken. And if there's any issues with my volume, just please let me know and adjust, and I'll adjust on my end. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first and hopefully the first in a long series of webinars hosted by JETRO Toronto office, and as it pertains to business opportunities for foreign companies in Japan. Firstly, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here today. We'll take the next 30 to 40 minutes and try to identify some opportunities in Japan's renewable energy market. Very quickly, my name is Johnny Tan, and I'm part of the business development team here at JETRO Toronto. And again, we're very happy and excited that all of you can take the time today to join us here. Just a gentle reminder for those not familiar with JETRO, we're a Japanese governmental organization mandated to facilitate bilateral trade and investment between Japan and the rest of the world. But I'll cover JETRO's programs and services in a little bit more detail at the latter part of our presentation here today. Now, our webinar today will aim to focus on these topics as follows. I'll give a quick backdrop on Japan's energy mix just for context, and then along with some of the projected governmental targets for various energy sources. Then we'll dive into a little bit more details, specifically in solar, wind, and biomass. We'll attempt to highlight some of the market value trends and potential entry points for foreign firms. And then finally, I've included a brief section on other energy-related developments in Japan. And then finally, as alluded to, I'll quickly summarize what are some of JETRO's free services and programs that can support your entry and expansion in the Japanese market. Okay, to start off, here's a quick snapshot of Japan's recent energy mix. Data latest as of 2015, source courtesy from Bloomberg. Total output as of 2015 is approximately 225,000 megawatts. From this figure, you can see prior to 2011, the majority of the energy mix is made up fairly equal parts of mainly nuclear, oil and gas, coal, and some hydro as well. There's a distinct shift following the 2011 Tohoku tsunami tragedy, which led to Japan's energy plans to shift, following the nuclear, power abruptly coming offline. And then subsequently in 2012 saw the start of the Japanese government's concerted effort to push more for sustainable sources of energy mix with its feed-in tariff system in the form of incentivized purchase prices for renewable energy sources. Okay, next let's take a look at the breakdown of some of the projected energy mix in Japan as of the year 2030 as targeted by the Japanese government. These figures were included as part of METI, which is the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. METI's detailed long-term energy supply and demand outlook, which was released back in the summer of 2015. As you can see, there's a substantial projected amount of renewable energies contributing to the energy pie. Cumulatively, it's almost up to a quarter of the energy output. Now, in general, it's evident some of the main goals to achieve by 2030 are less use of fossil fuel, more reliance on renewable energy, restarting nuclear plants when it's declared safe, and then also coal will continue to be a main pillar. Now, when building a more sustainable energy portfolio and curbing carbon emissions, it will continue to be one of the main focuses of the Japanese government. Japan, already one of the with the lowest greenhouse gas emissions per GDP among developed countries, has outlined ambitious plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 26% of 2013 levels by the year 2030 as part of its commitment to the Paris Agreement. Now, to reach these emission goals and to boast a more balanced and sustainable energy mix, METI projects to achieve certain levels of growth, of course, in these renewable energy verticals through its different policies and various incentive programs. Now, as you can see, geothermal, biomass, and wind-produced energy are expected to grow at the substantial rate of about 3 to 4 times that of the 2013 levels. While the needle for hydro is not expected to move significantly, it is mainly due to the already saturation of this particular resource. Now, finally, solar PV is expected to make the largest jump, with a projected increase of 7 times that of 2013 production levels by the year of 2030. As such, there should be some projected business opportunities in Japan for both domestic and foreign companies with expertise in renewables-related industries to consider entry. Now, with that, let's turn and discuss in more detail some of the renewable sources themselves, starting with solar PV. Now, solar PV energy became more widespread after the feed-in tariff scheme was implemented in 2012, where there's a lucrative purchase price was offered for energy produced from specifically solar sources. As you can see from this figure released by JPEA, which is Japan Photovoltaic Energy Association, it visualizes the significant shift or growth of solar PV market post-2011, as energy demand saw a major shift by the shutdown of large nuclear power plants. This figure demonstrates the domestic shipment of solar battery modules had increased every year, resulting in a total 9.3 gigawatts shipped by 2014. And comparatively speaking, the number of solar PV equipment installed also increased, with an accumulative 23 gigawatts being installed by 2014, as we'll see in the following slides. Now, as of August of last year, 2016, nearly 80 gigawatts of solar FIT applications have been processed and awarded contracts. And finally, although the latest official figures have yet to be released, since the FIT pricing for solar specifically has seen a gradual reduction since 2012, we expect the rate of construction of solar power plants to slow down quite a bit, and the market for these two areas is expected to moderately progress in the near and midterm. As alluded to, the growth rate of solar equipment specifically in Japan was curbed in 2014, as you can see by this figure, which depicts the volume of PV equipment installed from the onset of the FIT system until the projected figures out to the year 2020. Now, this slowdown is likely a result of the reduced FIT pricing, but also a probable reason is the logjam of the solar FIT contracts approved but not yet commissioned. Of the nearly 80 gigawatts of the approved solar FIT contracts as of August 2016, METI estimates that about 50 gigawatts will likely be installed eventually, whereas 30 gigawatts may fail to be commissioned. Now, in response to this development, the Japanese government plans to release some new provisions in the upcoming 2017 update, or the revised FIT scheme, to hopefully better facilitate the continued and balanced growth of this industry. As such, while there's moderate growth expected for the PV equipment and construction in the near term, there are other aspects in the solar industries where there may be some opportunities to take advantage of, to take a closer look at, in particular for foreign companies to consider, as we'll see in the following slides. Now, the new revised FIT programs released from April of 2017 is aimed to address issues with the current solar industry in Japan, and we open up some other subverticals of the solar industry. Here's a quick summary of some of the 4 expected revisions that of noteworthy. First of which is assessing feasibility of projects. There's a new system which will be in place to authorize projects after verifying the feasibility of the actual proposed project. Furthermore, the approved projects, the government will generally require these to also seek approval under the new system. Now, follow up to that, the second point, ensuring power generation is appropriately conducted. In addition to the feasibility review before the FIT contract approved, now projects will be required to carry out regular inspections and maintenance during operation, including a removal of equipment after the duration of the contract. Furthermore to this, this provision makes it possible to issue direct orders to rectify certain issues, such as safety concerns, or withdraw approval status from companies who fail to carry out these obligations. Third revision we expect is an advanced purchase pricing, which is a proposed plan to set mid to long-term pricing for purchase prices and improve predictability for project ROIs, helping the project planning of the developers looking to invest. And then finally, expanded distribution of renewable energy following the power system reforms. This provision is to encourage direct delivery of renewable energy sourced electricity to distribution companies and end users. This is done through revising the previous obligation of selling renewable energy sourced electricity exclusively to retail utilities, but now to include general transmission and distribution businesses as well. Now, this is put in place in hope to foster a more efficient, flexible, and cross-regional power system, making it possible to introduce more renewable energy to end users across the grid. Now, as for the previous slide, due to the impending revisions to the FIT program with increased emphasis on more stringent approval process, in particular on solar production applications itself in the operation, there's expected to be some opportunities for O&M operations and maintenance service providers, both domestic and foreign, in the solar PV market in Japan. As you'll see in this figure, starting at over $500 million in 2014. Now, the market for solar PV related services is projected to grow at a fairly healthy rate out to year 2020, where it's projected to reach $2.3 billion. This is over 27% cumulative growth rate over that time span. As we talked about, this upcoming mandatory inspection provision, along with some of the related revisions to the FIT program, should contribute to the further growth prospects of solar services, in particular this service market in Japan. Now finally, let's briefly take a look at some of the market entry of foreign firms in Japan with respect to the solar industry. Here we've included a short list of some of the examples of foreign companies currently operating in Japan in the solar PV market. Now, without going into too much detail of the list, you'll see a nice variety and mix of different international companies providing, mainly physical components, modules, panels, frames, physical components, as the market itself has demanded in the last several years, where there's been a lot of installation and construction. However, as discussed, there may be a shift towards demand for, more international O&M service providers moving forward in response to the impending regulations and inspection revisions to the FIT law. Now, existing solar PV businesses may have to look to, form some sort of measure aimed to ensuring their own business continuity. In areas such as facility maintenance, inspection, operations, safety measures, safety assurance, there may be a market entry potential for foreign companies with technical capabilities to support these solar energy businesses looking to maintain their existing operations or to develop new projects. Okay, next, let us quickly turn to the wind market in Japan, as it represents another very important source of renewable energy to discuss. As part of the aforementioned long-term energy supply and demand outlook released by METI, wind, of course, is a major component of the targeted growth of renewable energy in Japan. The government has set a target around about 1.7% for electricity generated by wind power, as equivalent to around 10 million kilowatts. In the next couple of slides, we'll attempt to look at some of the market trends, some of the government policies aimed to actively promote the spread of wind, and how is the government working towards achieving this target. Okay, as you can see, wind-generated energy appears to be set up to see significant growth in the near and long term in Japan from this figure. Against the backdrop of FIT scheme introduced in 2012, which wind was also a big part of, the installed capacity of wind in Japan has continued to climb, accumulating an annual power output of about 3.12 gigawatts in 2015. Additionally, the Japan Wind Power Association went on to further project or further set targets, aiming for installed capacity of over 10 gigawatts by 2020, 36 gigawatts by 2030, and about 75 gigawatts by 2050. Now, that's a targeted growth in excess of 20 times of current levels. As such, the wind generation industry should be considered by, all energy-related Canadian companies or foreign companies looking to expand into Japan. Now, in particular, I wanted to concentrate a little bit on offshore wind. Offshore wind is expected to see significant growth, as you can see from this figure and these targets, again, set by Japan Wind Power Association. They've also set out policies for increasing installation of offshore wind power and is petitioning for government for further deregulation and other efforts to expand this particular subvertical, which we'll get to in the next slide. The installed capacity of offshore wind power in Japan increased slightly during the 3-year period from 2013 to 2015, going from about 50 megawatts to 53 megawatts. Now, however, substantial growth is expected from 2020 onwards as a result of government implementing efforts to promote offshore wind power, and with that, opportunities for new players to enter Japan and hopefully enjoy, first mover advantages in a relatively young offshore wind industry. Now let's go into a little bit more detail how the government is promoting the growth of wind in Japan. First off, lucrative FIT price, which we've touched on several times already. Firstly, compared to solar PV, which has seen a slight gradual decrease since the onset, the purchase price of offshore wind remains at a relatively high rate of 36 yen per kilowatt hour, leading to expectations that offshore wind power will continue to be profitable in Japan. Second of which, in relation to this, there's a revised FIT program with advanced pricing, similar to what we talked about in solar. The revised FIT system as of April has a proposal that applications with long lead times, such as wind projects, geothermal projects, will have purchase prices for authorized projects set a few years in advance, making it easier for companies to plan and project market trends. third framework is to expedite the environmental assessment. Now, although Japanese law requires environmental assessment to be carried out when building power stations for wind and other energy sources, this procedure itself is under revision consideration to how you facilitate further growth of the wind power. NATO, the public organization, or also known as New Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, is aiming to cut the usual 4-year-long assessment period down to 2 by looking to expedite the assessment's first stage, which is the environmental impact study stage. And finally, the last part of the framework we're going to touch on is there's a proposed mandatory regular inspection of facilities over 500 kilowatts. Wind turbine inspection in Japan up until now has been left largely to the discretion of the power companies. However, as wind power continues to grow in Japan, there's an obvious need for safety regulations. The Ministry of Economy, Trade, Industry, METI, proposed a new system of safety measures for wind farms and solar power plants as well, with the proposed plans of what they call mandatory regular inspections every 3 years for equipment with an output over 500 kilowatts. Now, that was a mouthful and a lot of information to digest, but full details of the proposed provisions are expected to be all announced by April of this year. With that said, where are some of the market entry opportunities to consider for foreign firms, such as, some of our audience here today? Firstly, compared to other global wind markets like Europe, the infrastructure needed to install and operate a wind industry, especially that of offshore wind, at the projected scale have not yet been fully put into place in Japan. Further, Japan lacks companies and some human resource with experience in the field of offshore wind power, something established foreign firms that's has experience executing projects such as doing floating offshore generation can come in and take advantage of or offer their expertise. Now, moreover, since over 90% of the wind power facilities in Japan are facilities with a generating capacity of over 500 kilowatts, the threshold we just talked about, it means that majority of these would fall into the new proposed system for mandatory regular inspection currently being considered by the Japanese government. Now, accordingly, an uptick in demand will likely follow for O&M services for wind power facilities, in particular, something that foreign-based O&M service providers can consider. And finally, to end this wind section, here is a current snapshot of the wind industry supply chain in Japan. It's noteworthy to point out that offshore turbine manufacturing and technological support is, where there's some high business opportunity for foreign companies looking to enter the Japanese market. Companies such as Vestas from Denmark, GE of the States, Siemens of Germany, are expanding their traction in Japan through their expertise and providing wind turbine technology in Japan. Okay, moving right along, the last of our 3 verticals, let's cover some details of the biomass market in Japan in a little bit more detail. Now, as with solar and wind that we just talked about, biomass was another renewable energy source included in the FIT program back in 2012. As you can see, since the initial introduction of the incentive purchase pricing, the number of facilities and output by relation has been on a rise, along with the number of biomass-derived products. As this figure depicts, when considering the biomass market size in terms of equipment and then the associated plants, along with the biomass-derived products, i.e. the electricity, pellets, wood pellets, biogas, etc., the size of the market was about 230 billion yen as of 2014, which translate roughly to 2.7 billion Canadian dollars. In the coming years, the market is projected to expand further, transitioning to a cumulative growth rate of about 10%, expected to reach over 400 billion yen by 2020, which is closely almost 5 billion Canadian dollars. Now, I want to point out, as of last year, 2016, biomass actually surpassed wind as the second largest renewable energy source in Japan, and of course, behind solar PV still. As per the same report, long-term energy supply and demand outlook by METI, we've been discussing, biomass will continue to project to be an important source of sustainable energy. Now, this slide I wanted to include and again remind us of some of the targets by 2030. Biomass is set at an aimed figure of approximately 3.7 to 4.6 of the power mix. And you'll see how it compares to the other sources as well. Now, those smaller scale biomass projects are gaining more traction, partly due to, first of all, the higher FIT pricing at 40 yen per kilowatt hour, but more importantly also due to the main industrial hurdle of procurement of biomass fuel. This chart outlines a list of the recently commissioned or upcoming large-scale biomass projects in the next several years. And I put this in here in order to give our audience today just an idea of some of the projects expected to come online in Japan as it pertains to larger scale developments. With a number of biomass projects expected to continue to grow, now where can Canadian companies, foreign companies look to enter the market in Japan? Now here's a breakdown of some of the biomass component subverticals and some of the related major players in Japan. The red square on the bottom of the slide you can see denotes that there are prominent foreign affiliated companies currently operating in Japan within that particular subvertical. As you can see, there are many parts of the industry without entry by foreign firms, and we believe these are areas that present potentially consideration and business opportunities for Canadian firms, some of our listeners here today. And just a quick aside, which may be of interest to some of us today, one of the main services we provide at JETRO to foreign firms exploring entry possibilities into Japan is to provide business matching a service with potential Japanese partners for qualified companies. Thus, if you're interested, our program attempts to reach out to these companies and kind of gauge interest in a potential strategic partnership with you. And I'll talk a little bit more of that in the later part of my presentation when we get into some of the JETRO services that we provide. Now, finally, to further detail entry opportunities for foreign firms into Japan, I would like to highlight two prospective methods. First of which, supply of components for biomass power plants. As we just talked about in the previous slide, there are areas where foreign-based manufacturers have provided a number of components for current biomass power plants in Japan. Quick example, US-based GE's energy division in Japan, GE Power and Water, entered the biomass market in 2014, and since have been manufacturing gas engines for multiple biomass power plants in Japan. Second, which is maybe of more importance and maybe have more traction, if you will, for foreign companies, is the supply of biomass fuel material. Procurement of fuel is an issue that is shared across many biomass power plants in Japan. Numerous Japanese companies find it difficult to source fuel domestically and need to import material from overseas. Now, for example, the Japanese company Air Water Inc. is one company that imports coconut shells from palm oil production factories in Indonesia and Malaysia, and also wooden pellets from South Asia and North America. So you can kind of project and estimate some of the costs associated with such an import part of the supply chain. So as such, entry opportunities are available for foreign companies who handle biomass fuel material. For these companies, they can probably look to set up a presence in Japan and engage in full-fledged sales and support. This is a feasible option for entry into the supply chain directly. Next, let me quickly run through some of the other energy-related developments in Japan that may be of interest to our listeners today. Here is a recently released strategic roadmap for fuel cell usage in Japan by METI, again, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, as it pertains to hydrogen fuel cell. In quick summary, the Japanese government plans to develop and disseminate commercially viable fuel cells for residential use in initial stages by the late 2010s. For fuel cells for autonomous industrial use is aimed to be implemented by the mid-2020s. This slide outlines some of the major targeted milestones in the upcoming years. And because it's very text-heavy, please review in a little bit more detail afterwards. Now, finally, let's briefly touch a little bit on a new government program we would like to share called the Zero Energy Home Program. As you'll see in Figure 1 in the top left corner, the residential sector in Japan has seen considerable rise in the overall energy consumption since the early 90s, although energy consumption per household has leveled off. If you look at the top right, Figure 2, energy consumption is identified and broken down into 5 categories, as seen, 3 of which is the main consumption sources: power lighting, hot water supply, and heating makes up majority of the consumption of an average household's energy. Now, recently, the Japanese government introduced the ZEH program, which is the Zero Energy Home Program. ZEH is a house with an annual net energy consumption around zero or less. Excuse me. By saving as much energy as possible while maintaining comfortable living environments. This is achieved through better heat insulation, higher efficiency of the equipment, and utilizing other renewable sources. For now, mainly solar PV was introduced in the proposal, but there are plans to implement other sources of renewable energy to contribute to a ZEH, or Zero Energy Home. Since building a ZEH is relatively expensive, government has provided a time-sensitive subsidy, about a third or two-thirds of construction costs. And that depends on how much savings is achieved. For homes that achieve 75% energy savings, they receive what is called a nearly ZEH subsidy. Now, this is projected to subsidize some of the smaller and thinner-walled homes in the urban areas where, just because of the construction itself is difficult to achieve full energy savings. For homes that can actually achieve the 100% energy saving, they receive the full ZEH subsidy. This image, again, shows the strategic roadmap for promoting ZEH proposed by the examination committee, which is appointed by METI. Now, METI also plans to double their budget in promoting energy efficiency for buildings and homes, of which ZEH subsidy is included on the list. The objective for this is to promote the popularization of houses and buildings with high energy saving performances to reduce energy costs. The project itself aims to ensure that more than half of the newly constructed houses will be deemed ZEHs and that buildings will eventually turn to ZEBs, or zero energy buildings, by 2020. With that said, foreign companies in the smart home energy industry can penetrate this area. O&Ms in solar, wind, biomass, battery storage, energy management system, all can feasibly have an opportunity to work with ZEH developers to create energy efficient homes. I think we're running a little bit behind, so I'll quickly do the last section as well. Now that is it for the industry specific aspect of our presentation today. Next, if please allow me to quickly share what we do at JETRO and how we help foreign companies enter Japan. So again, we're here from JETRO, Japan External Trade Organization. We're a Japanese governmental organization that promotes mutual trade and investment between Japan and the rest of the world. Our two main mandates are broken down into investment promotion, where we offer a long menu of free services to help companies enter and set up an operation in Japan. And second mandate, which is export promotion, we support Japanese companies expand their businesses, products, services, technologies into the global market. We have a relatively large domestic and international network. We have 74 offices worldwide, with 46 offices within Japan across the different prefectures. And domestically here in Canada, our Canadian operation is mainly based out of our Toronto office, and of course with support from our office in Vancouver. Now, quickly, in the context of today's discussion, I wanted to quickly go over our menu of free services and initiatives offered for foreign companies looking to explore entry and set up a presence in Japan. We have three main pillars of services offered, depending on the progress and stage of your Japan expansion plan. First stage is the information and guidance gathering stage. For companies in the initial exploratory stage, we offer assistance in the form of consultation, providing market intelligence, providing market trends, market reports, list of potential competitors, and so forth. We also broker many government and regional incentive programs for you to consider. All this information we provide is basically aimed to help companies during their decision-making stage. How do we supplement their decision-making? Second main umbrella is our more hands-on support. This umbrella of services is when a company is maybe more ready to make a trip to Japan for maybe the initial setup process, potentially meet with customers, end users, resellers, have a couple of meetings in Japan. JETRO offers free temporary office space through our Invest Japan Business Support Center, conveniently located in 6 major city hubs for your convenience. And on site, we have a roster of subject matter experts that you can consult on topics such as taxation, human resource, corporate registration, industrial regulation, and so forth. And then finally, the third umbrella of service is something we've poured increased time and effort into in the recent years, and we've received positive feedbacks from companies that's used this, applicable companies, qualified companies. Basically, we provide business matching support where they try to facilitate introductions to potential Japanese partners, distributors, M&A targets, etc. A little bit, what I touched on in the wind section. This allows foreign companies, Canadian companies, to reach out and engage the interest of Japanese market through a potential strategic partnership and start a dialogue. Now, that was a very quick run-through of our services. If there's any specific questions or interest to pursue from any of our listeners, feel free, by all means, please reach out to us, reach out to me, reach out to us at JETRO Toronto, and we can follow up and try to share more on a particular interest of yours. Now, finally, I wanted to quickly just to give a bit more detail on the service and resources provided at our IBSC, which again is our Invest Japan Business Support Center. Our IBSC are spread across the country in Japan in 6 major locations located in Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and Fukuoka, as you can see. This resource is ideal for use during initial exploration and setup stages, and you can do all this in a centralized and convenient location while having access to JETRO's resources, such as advisors and consultants. Again, this is a part of our service, which we've received positive feedback for companies that have moved along in their Japan plans, and we encourage you to also consider using it during your future Japan plans. That is it for me. That's the end of our presentation here today. I hope you found it useful. I know we threw a lot of information. If you have any questions following this, please let us know. And also to the teams that are heading over to Tokyo for this World Smart Energy Week, best of luck. I hope everyone has a fruitful trip, and we hope to hear from you afterwards. Please consider JETRO, and do not hesitate to contact us further to discuss your potential expansions into Japan. Thank you very much.
Okay, Johnny. Well, don't go anywhere. We've got plenty of questions that have been typed in. So I'm going to put you on the spot and pick some of those. First, I'm going to hit one from Richard that just came in while you were talking about those services that JETRO offers, specifically yes, some of the ones where you had the different levels. Are those offered for free or for a fee?
All our services that we offer to applicable companies are free of charge. We don't have, none of our services that we do offer are fee for service, so yes, they are free.
Okay, great. Let me just put up a slide once again reminding people, if your control panel is shrunk off to the right side of your screen, click on that orange arrow to open it up, and you can type questions in the lower box in the questions portion. It's separated into a display area and an input area, so make sure to type in the lower section, the input area. Johnny, I'm going to move back to a slide early in the presentation, see if I can find this again. I think it was Keith wanted to get confirmation as to the units that we were using. It's this one, and you said this is 10,000s of kilowatts, but I think, should this be kilowatt hours instead? Is that just a typo, or is that correct as kilowatts?
It might be kilowatt hours. Sorry, I would have to go back and verify. Yes, if it's just
okay,
a unit, then kilowatt hours, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Sorry about that, Keith. Thanks for pointing it out.
Thanks, Keith.
All right, let's move back to our question section here, a little placeholder. Here's one that came in from Derek. See if I can paraphrase this a little bit. You mentioned some issues with the industry slowing down, and I think this is around solar. Yeah, what scale of solar projects do we think will still present opportunities for growth in Japan?
Okay, Derek, let me take a stab at this. Yeah, so we talked about there may be a slowdown in solar because, one, of the FIT pricing, and two, because of a logjam, because of when the contracts were offered, the prices were offered back in 2012, they were at a fairly high price at 42 yen per kilowatt hour. They've gradually slowed down, so a lot of large-scale solar projects were put into application, approved, but not yet commissioned. So there was a lot of construction that went on in the first 2 years subsequent to 2012. There's been a logjam now, so there may be some slowdown, and this is also due to issues with getting contracts for purchase contracts from the utilities itself, or it's down to maybe securing land for a major mega project. Now, by the same token, there's actually other parts of the solar industry that maybe have still going to chug along and have potential to further develop, and that's, I'm talking about residential in particular for rooftop solar that we've seen to continue to develop and continue to proliferate in Japan. And we're not just talking about residential rooftop. We've also seen success in structures on top of schools, supermarkets, car dealerships. A lot of the suburban areas where they want to set up an emergency response center where you want to have a alternate source of energy, potentially, knock on wood, hope it doesn't happen. If there's a tragedy that happens, you need energy off grid. So a lot of these smaller towns and suburban areas are setting up rooftop solar in response to that. And I want to actually take this opportunity and to kind of plug one of the success cases that we've done is a Canadian company called Solar Power Network. They've expanded nicely into the rooftop solar business in Japan in the last several years. We provide some service to them. And if Derek or certain listeners today are interested, we can forward a full-scale the success case profile that we did for SPN, and they can kind of get a sense of what they did and what they're doing now in Japan to hopefully stimulate similar entry by some of our listeners here today.
All right. I had a question. I think, I'm going to move back to a previous slide, see if I can find the one they were talking about. Nope, this is JETRO offices. It's a slide where you were talking about some of the sample companies who have gotten into the Japanese renewables market. And I can't find it at the moment, but we had a question. It sounded like you were talking about companies in a variety of countries. You mentioned Siemens and some others, but you didn't seem to mention those from Canada and the U.S. Has North America been very prominent in getting into this market so far?
Yes, there's been, as I mentioned, Solar Power Network, that's one of the more prominent Canadian companies that we're proud of that JETRO specifically has supported. And there has been some American companies as well. I don't have the names off the top of my head, and again, that's something we can provide. A great resource if you wanted to consider. So if certain companies wanted to really see where some of the success have been internationally, JETRO, in terms of the companies we've helped, we have a list of success cases on our website that there are full profiles of, how certain companies have entered successfully, what are some of their challenges and so forth, and where they project onwards. So that's a great resource that I would encourage some of our listeners to look into. Again, look at some of the success cases we have on our website if they're looking for specific, other examples.
All right. I had a few questions about when you were talking about wind power, onshore versus offshore. I had one question from Tyson asking if there's a breakdown between the two segments, and then another question from Clarice asking about any government or private programs specifically targeted at offshore wind power development.
Okay, so I will answer Tyson's question first. The breakdown, I believe it's about half-half. I can be wrong, don't quote me on that. Again, I can provide backup following this presentation. The reason that offshore is being pushed further, and I took a bit more focus in my presentation, is that seems to be more potential for offshore in Japan because of just geography, because it's an island country. There's more potential to harvest some of that wind power along the shores and so forth. Now, kind of goes to the second part of your question. What are some of the private and governmental programs aimed to further promote offshore? I guess government-wise, it relates to what we talked about in echoes, what we covered in the presentation. First of all, there's a relatively higher FIT price, 36 yen for offshore wind compared to 24 for solar. As well, government understands that there's a longer that long approval process may be a hindrance for foreign companies. So they're looking to expedite the environmental approval process, cutting down that environmental impact. Not cutting down, but maybe expediting and shortening it and making it more efficient. Now, on the private side, a lot of companies are putting in what they call demonstration projects. I guess I can cover a couple of examples. One example, there was recently a 5-year demonstration project between Godo City in Nagasaki and Ministry of Environment of a floating wind turbine, offshore wind turbine, that actually became the first commercialized wind turbine in Japan as of last year, I believe. There's a lot of similar projects that are coming online, i.e. being commercialized in other regions that are conducive to offshore wind, such as Hokkaido and Fukushima. And to take it one step further, if attendees are more interested in trying to find more information on what type of geography and where, which areas in Japan are more conducive to offshore wind, we can definitely provide information subsequently. I think we have a map that covers the different wind potentials within Japan. So I hope that covers that question.
Good. Let's move on to a question that was asked from a few people about biomass now. Well, actually, Igor was interested specifically in biomass. Keith was interested in general in different renewable energy areas about partnerships and business matching. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. Okay. So as biomass, it's expected to continue to grow. It surpassed wind as the second largest source of renewable energy. We expect it to be strategic partnership opportunities for foreign firms. I guess I can just, 2 examples. Fujisaki Electric jointly did a new, specifically bamboo fire plant with German-based Lambien Energy Solution in 2016. Again, in 2016, another Finnish biomass maker called Volter. They also set up a JV office with Akita City. So these examples, illustrate that there are opportunities for foreign firms that want to come into Japan and enter with a local strategic partner. We understand there are definitely benefits coming into Japan with a partner, whether it's working with someone to mitigate some of those risks financially, being in culture, having access to supply chain is very important. So that's why a lot of companies, and not just biomass, but various different energy-related sectors are coming into Japan via potential partnerships. And hopefully, JETRO can be of help to some of our listeners here today with some of our business matching opportunities, and we can further discuss if there's interest.
Okay, very good. Let's see. We had a question again going back to Tyson. He said you mentioned a lot about production methods, but you didn't talk too much about storage.
Sure, I can. I'm not a subject matter expert on storage, but I'll try. Yeah, I would expect energy storage to have business potential in Japan. As we talked about, all 3 of the renewables verticals have room for growth. In particular, let's say solar. As we mentioned, of the 80 gigawatts that's been approved, there's expected to be 50 gigawatts to be commissioned in the near to midterm. Now, with all those constructions coming online, there's going to be a need for storage. Whether it's storage between the plant itself, the production plant itself, and then going directly to utilities, or going to the transmission companies. As we alluded to, there is a bigger push for direct transmission between the production and then also going to transmission company, going to distribution companies. So with those 2 things in mind, there's going to be a need for storage technology. Now, whether it's whatever form the storage technology is, compressed air, battery, or other forms, I think efficiency and size of the actual unit will be of big interest for the Japanese market. So there's definitely potential for foreign companies that are specialized in storage to consider talking to not just developers, but maybe the utility companies, distribution companies, those companies directly related to the grid, and so forth.
All right. We've been sitting on this question slide for way too long. I'm just going to put up some of the JETRO slides again, just so that people have something else to look at. All right. Let's go to a question from Thomas. I have to scroll back and find that again. Is there a shrinking population problem in Japan? Do we see that affecting the need for energy and the impact on renewable sources?
There isn't the issue. I don't know. Well, there's an issue. Yes, there's shrinking population in Japan. There's an aging population in Japan, so that relates to a great need for medical devices and healthcare and so forth. But pertaining to what we're talking about here today, no. In the slide we talked about with the zero energy home, it shows that although consumption per household may be going down and leveling off, overall energy consumption overall in the residential sector or by people is actually slowly going up. And that's why there's a push and need for zero energy home, more sustainable energy, more control on emissions and so forth. So energy demand continues to be an issue, and also of great focus in Japan. So whether the population is stagnant or slowly decreasing, that energy demand remains there. I guess that has to do with maybe lifestyle, technology, and so forth. But it's not a negative impact or a negative inhibitor of the growth of renewable energy in Japan.
All right. And one more question I think I'm going to take, and then we'll close things down for the hour so that people have a little time to prepare before their next meeting on the day. And this is related to biomass once again. When you were quoting some of your statistics about biomass, did you have any incorporation of or interest in separating out waste to biomass?
In terms of the source itself,
it's not much of a question. That's why I'm having a little problem. It just says waste to biomass. What about that? So okay. I'm not quite sure how to address it.
Waste to biomass. So there's different sources. I'm going to interpret this question and answer accordingly. I assume she is talking about the different sources of biomass energy production, whether it's wood to wood pellets, timber, agriculture waste, and the different types of sources of fuel for the biomass production. Yes, that includes all the different sources. Now, interestingly enough, there's different feed-in tariff prices for the different sources. Wood is of one price, wood pellet is another price, non-wood waste is another price, and recycled wood is another price. So there's definitely different categories of biomass material and the source of where this energy comes from.
Okay, I think that's going to take us through most of the questions. We had a few requests for contact, and we have those noted. We're going to get back to you on that. And I'll just put up Johnny's personal email address as well as the general JETRO Toronto office inquiry email address. Please feel free to use those if you would like to get a little more information or get some help on your business move towards Japan. Johnny, are there any concluding comments you want to make before I close us out?
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Appreciate your time in joining us today. Thank you, Ken, for hosting and moderating. And we look forward to hearing from every and all of our listeners and how we can help you further develop your market in Japan. And we're here to help. Looking forward to it. Thank you, everybody.
Very good. That's going to conclude our session. At this time, I will stop the recording.